You are not. Today I'm going to talk about the consilience of survival of consciousness, body ownership, and cellular turnover research. Because you now have full bellies, we'll now be talking about bodily functions. So I'm going to talk about it in a different order than the title is. I'm going to talk about body ownership and cellular turnover, which is a very mainstream topic, and it's published in mainstream journals. And then I'm also going to talk about survival of consciousness, more edge field or non-materialist, non-mainstream. For example, if you Google Scholar search body ownership, you get over 2 million results. Survival of consciousness, over 1 million. But your search body ownership and survival of consciousness did not match any articles. When Google can't find a thing, it doesn't exist. So, okay, let's start with body ownership. There are three major aspects to body ownership. A sense of mindness, this body belongs to me. A sense of agency, the ability to initiate and control action. And a sense of self-location. IB's right here. Here I am in my body. And so we're getting constant, continual feedback that we're in this body. There is all kinds of ways. And so when I see something, when I feel something, and then my experience is that I'm feeling it, but I know it happened to this body, that centers me into this body. I am in this body. And when I move, this body moves. When I go on a roller coaster, this body gets dizzy, and I feel the dizziness. So we're getting this continual information and feedback that this is where I am, this is where I am. But this can go awry very easily. In a condition called somatoparaphrenia, people, often stroke victims who have localized lesions in the brain, will feel like they don't own the paralyzed limb. And so they'll think that's not my hand. And if your hand is in the visual field where that hand is, they'll mistake your hand for theirs. And it also goes awry in situations of microgravity, like orbital and parabolic flights. In parabolic flights, the jet climbs, and then it dives, and it climbs, and it dives to mimic a weightless situation. And it creates what's called the inversion illusion, where you think that you're upside down or that you're right side up and the world is upside down. And when they come out of the parabola and everybody's supposed to get back where they're supposed to be, people go wrong. They go upside down, and this can result in major accidents. It's also really easy to mess with intentionally. So experimentally induced illusions demonstrate an astonishing malleability in our idea of body ownership. It's really easy to mess with it, using things literally like smoke and mirrors. So we'll talk about two illusions. The first one is called the rubber hand illusion. It was first published in 1998, and it's been done hundreds of times in all kinds of different ways. But overall, this is how it looks. So you are seated, the participant is seated at a table, and there's some kind of barrier preventing you from seeing your arm. And then they put a rubber hand so that what you can see is now a rubber hand. And then an experimenter uses a paintbrush and simultaneously brushes your hand at the same time as the rubber hand. So now what you can see is the brush on the rubber hand, but what you can feel is the brush on your own hand. And what people report is during the experiment, there were times when it seemed as if I was feeling the touch of the paintbrush in the location where I saw the rubber hand touch. It seemed that the touch I felt was caused by the paintbrush touching the rubber hand. I felt as the rubber hand was mine. And they can also have what's called proprioceptive drift, where if they say close your eyes and take your other hand and put it under the table where your hand is, and that people drift toward the rubber hand than to where their actual hand is. And you think, oh yeah, well that's just a hand. Like I couldn't. So if your brain is doing a good job, it will mistake the rubber hand for your hand. And you think, well, but not in my body, right? Oh no, totally your whole body too. So in the full body or body swap illusion is the second one. They use immersive embodied virtual reality, where sensory and motor stimuli occur in synchrony with the first-person perspective of an avatar using computer-generated imaging or stereoscopic video. So again, this has been done hundreds and hundreds of times in all kinds of different ways. So for example, the virtual reality, there's a head-mounted display, and so the camera is the eyes now. So what the camera can see is what you are seeing out of your eyes, but the camera is 6 feet behind you. So then when you see someone, it's like with the paintbrush, when you see someone touching that body, it's 6 feet, the eyes are 6 feet behind you, so your virtual body, where you think you are, is 6 feet in front of you. And there's all kinds of ways to do this. You can do it where you're behind yourself, where you're above yourself looking up, you're above yourself looking down. If the camera is on the experimenter's head and you're both doing paintbrushes, your experience is that you are painting the paintbrush on your own hand. It's really easy to mess with this. So again, hundreds of studies. And you can feel body swapped in bodies of all kinds of shapes and sizes and genders and colors very easily, even inanimate objects and animal avatars. And then in this one, it's just socks and gloves. All you are socks and gloves. So this is the head-mounted display, and this is what you can see here. You can see when you move your hands and when you move your feet, these hands and feet move, these gloves and socks move. So your brain goes, oh, okay, we're over there, we're invisible now? Okay, I got it. And even with a mannequin, they can do this. So in this picture, these are the cameras, and so what this guy can see in his head-mounted display is like looking down at this body. And so she's gonna touch both of these things with the paintbrushes, and what he's gonna, it won't take long at all, he's gonna think, well, I don't remember taking my shirt off and doing all those sit-ups, but okay, that's my body, okay, that's my body now, okay. And they have a subjective experience of that's their body, and the brain's doing its job. It's got feedback that that's its body, and it knows, and it's doing a good job. And so there's this subjective experience, but there's also an objective way to determine this, where if the virtual body has threat to it, you will experience anxiety. And they track this using skin conductance responses. So if a knife gets pulled on that belly, you will respond as if a knife got pulled on your belly. So our sense of body ownership is highly flexible. The mind is only tenuously tethered to the body. So where is it in the body? Which cells? Is it in all the cells? Where is it? So let's talk about cellular turnover. So there's a little background on this. So in the late 50s, early 60s, there was a lot of above ground nuclear testing, and there was a huge boom in carbon-14 in the atmosphere, and it quickly got everywhere, all over the whole planet. And it got incorporated into the carbon dioxide, and then the plants ate the carbon dioxide, and the animals ate the plants, and the people ate the plants and the animals, and everybody had carbon-14 in their system. And so this group in Sweden, they looked at pine tree rings, right? Because they get, every year they're established. So they took the cellulose from the rings each year, and that directly mimicked what was in the atmosphere at that time. So they could track, they could like do a curve of the carbon-14 content in the atmosphere. And then it turns out that the genomic DNA also mimics the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere. So they use mass spectroscopy to determine the level of carbon-14 in different kinds of tissues. And then they can find like the birth date of that tissue, because they know what year that was that the atmosphere looked like that. So these are some things that, using this bomb pulse method, have been found. So the intestinal epithelial cells, the lining of the intestine, turns over every 5 days. The non-epithelial cells in the intestine, 16 years. Cardiac myocytes, the muscle cells in the heart, less than 50% turnover in your whole life. The genes in the cerebellum stop growing by 2 years old, but the glial cells, which are the scaffolding of the brain, they turn over every 4 years. Skin, 2 to 3 weeks. Bones, 10 years. Skeletal muscle's 15 years, and your tendons are probably the age you were when you had your pubescent growth spurt. You grew your tendons, and then they were done. The lens of the eye and dental enamel never gets turned over. So if we're anywhere, that's where we are. And so you might have heard this, the dental enamel is the window to the soul. You might have heard this myth that the body turns over every 7 years, and that's nonsense. Clearly, it's a lot of different things happening all the time. So the body is fluctuating, but the body is not all that you think that it is. So human cells in the body number at 30 trillion. And this is pretty standard because even like when muscle builds, it doesn't make a new cell, the myofibrils inside the muscle cell. So like my bicep probably has just as many muscle cells as your bicep. The cool thing is, so 30 trillion human cells, the cool thing is, in your body, there are also 30 trillion bacteria. There's just as many of them as there are of us. They're very small, so they don't take up as much space. But if you could like take them out and put them, they would weigh about half a pound. It's like 2 sticks of butter of bacteria in your body. And you should thank them because you would be dead without them. We can't digest our food. They educate our immune system against what's friend and what's foe. This I just think is super fascinating. In human breast milk, there's a particular oligosaccharide, a sugar, in huge amounts. A baby can't use that sugar. The gut flora, the bacteria in the baby's gut, love it. So for eons, the mother's milk has been having this high content of this oligosaccharide simply to build the gut flora in the baby. So where, it's a symbiotic relationship, obviously, we would be dead without them. So when you have live culture probiotics, you might want to do what I do, and I say, hello, little bugs. I call them little bugs. And I say, thanks, little bugs. Welcome home. This is where you live now, in Julieland. So in the morning, because skin turns over fast, so in the morning, Mark and I say, good morning, welcome, new cells. So the body is fluctuating, and only part of it is you. There's this all these other species. And don't get me started on all the viruses and mites. And there's all kinds of things growing in you that is not you. So if you're not, so where are you? And it looks like you are both nowhere and everywhere. Because research demonstrating Psi, that is telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and psychokinesis. We heard this paper has been referenced a couple times at this conference. So in 2018, the APA published in an APA journal this, your friend and mine, Thorsten, professor of psychology in Sweden, Etzel Kardinia, in this paper cited over 125 published works and found that an extensive amount of quality research exists providing a cumulative support for the reality of Psi, which cannot be readily explained away by the reality of the studies, the quality of the studies, fraud, selective reporting, experimental or analytical incompetence, or other frequent criticisms. So mind can transcend space and time. So this last topic that I wanted to talk about was survival of consciousness. And there are the 3 main topics are blinded mediumship readings, near-death experiences involving brain death and that have veridical information comes back, and then verifiable stories of children who remember past lives. So you've heard me talk about blinded mediumship readings before, and I love my p-values, but we're having a meal here. Let's do some more kind of fun things. So I'm going to tell some stories. And because of the blinding of our mediumship research, in our protocol, we ask the medium, what did the person look like? What's their personality? How did they die? What are their hobbies? So there's not a lot of room for interesting stories. But I have collected stories from the mediums on our team over the years. And, they solve murders, they find bodies, but again, it's a little lighthearted. We're just having dinner. So I thought I'd do a little bit, I wouldn't talk about murder and suicide. How about that? So, and I wanted to keep these stories short. So this is my example of a story from a Winbridge certified research medium. This story is from Laura Lynn Jackson. And she said, one sitter's dad came through repeatedly and told his daughter to stop, all capitals, using the 2-in-1 shampoo on her daughter, his granddaughter. He kept bringing it up over and over. She said because he was so insistent, she stopped using it. Within a week, her daughter's chronic skin condition, which she had had for over a year and a half and which various doctors had diagnosed as viral and without a cure, cleared up in a week and never came back. And Laura says, I thought this was neat, as it showed that the other side can intervene and help loved ones. Okay, and then this is a story from a paramedic in Australia named Frank. And so this one is the story about near-death experience. And so I will read this. Was posted online. And I promised Mark I wouldn't try and do the Australian accent. So I won't do it. It will be hard because he says "reckon" at one point. A 49-year-old male developed chest pain and called for an ambulance. My partner and I were the first on scene. He had stopped breathing. We assessed him and found that he was in cardiac arrest. We ended up working on the patient for 20 minutes without any change. One of the senior paramedics said, okay, what do you guys reckon? Shall we call it? I was working with a new rookie paramedic and said, no, he can use some more experience with CPR. The senior paramedic laughed and said, hey, if you want him to get more experience, there's a mannequin back at the station. He's got just as much chance of resuscitating it as this guy. Almost as though the out-of-body person had heard that and decided, hey, no, I don't want to die yet. We had miraculous, spontaneous return of circulation. We expedited him to hospital. 2 days later, we found out that he had been extubated and was neurologically intact in cardiac ICU. No way, we think. Good for him. That probably would have been the last we ever thought about him if it wasn't for the knock at our station door one early morning. Hi, Frank, the man looked at me. My name's John. I believe we met a couple months ago. I look at him and try to work out where I treated him and for what. I just couldn't place it. The man sees my confusion. He says, the last time we met, my heart wasn't working. In fact, they tell me it had stopped completely. Now I know who he is, says Frank. I invite him in and we get chatting. Finally, he says, I want to thank you for giving me an extra 10 minutes of CPR, even if it was only so your rookie could practice. Sorry, I say, instantly aware of how close the man was to dying because we were going to quit. I was there, the man said, you see, I saw the whole thing, and I remember Jack saying that he wanted to call it, and you saying your rookie needed extra work on his CPR anyway, so you may as well keep going. Frank at this point is shocked and fascinated at the same time. Really? What else do you remember? Well, I remember the other paramedics suggested that they should be just as much likelihood of resuscitating the mannequin back at the station as me. And it was about then that I realized that this was serious. If I wanted to live, I was going to have to get back in that body. And the next thing I know, I'm in hospital a few days later. Okay, and then this is my story from about children who remember past lives. And if you're familiar with Jim Tucker's work, you probably have heard all the amazing stories that he has on this. And so this is a story from the book from 2013 called Return to Life. And I asked Jim if I could use it. And I said, I was looking for something short and odd. And he goes, that one's short and odd. So yeah, go ahead. So this is a story from Jim's book. Most of the claims of past lives as animals are, of course, unverifiable. One strange case in Thailand of a boy who claimed to have been a python in a previous life seems to be an exception. The boy named Dalawang claimed he had been a deer in a past life. He said that after he was killed by a hunter, he was reborn as a snake. Just before Dalawang was conceived, his father had eaten snake meat when it was served to him by an acquaintance who had killed a python after an extended struggle. When Dalawang was 3, that acquaintance, Mr. Hugh, came to a party at the house next to Dalawang's family. Neither Dalawang nor his mother had met him before. When Dalawang saw him, he became infuriated and tried to find a hammer or a stick to use to attack him. He said Mr. Hugh had killed him when he was a snake and gave details of how the killing occurred. These were ones that Dalawang seemingly had no way of knowing, involving a particular cave and a fight between a snake and 2 dogs, followed by a confrontation with the owner of the dogs who killed the snake. Hugh confirmed that all the details were correct. Dalawang said that after he was killed, his spirit saw his future father and thought he was kinder than the other men who ate the snake meat. He followed him home and soon entered his mother's body. His father reported that when Dalawang met Hugh, he touched him on his left shoulder and said he'd been bitten by the snake there. His father said Hugh did indeed have a scar on that spot from a snake bite. 20 years later, Dalawang still believed he had been a snake in his past life. He continued to visit the cave where the snake had been killed. He would go there every couple of months and meditate. During his meditation, he obtained information about using herbs to help the sick, and he was recognized in his village at that point as a local doctor. I should also add that Dalawang was born with ichthyosis, a skin condition that caused his body, particularly the lower half, to be covered in scales. You might say that made his skin look snake-like. So that's my stories. Not these particular stories necessarily are not evidence, but these three bodies of research, mediumship, near-death experiences, and children who remember past lives demonstrate that mind can survive the death of the body. So what did we learn today? Apparently nothing. Our sense of body ownership is highly flexible. The mind is only tenuously tethered to the body. The body is fluctuating and only partially you. Mind can transcend space and time. Mind can survive the death of the body. So in conclusion, the body is clearly more than the thing that carries your head around from conference to conference. It is remarkable. It is a physical thing in an intimate symbiotic relationship with entirely other species that they couldn't live without us and we couldn't live without them. And then it also has this intimate relationship with this non-local thing we call mind that can transcend space and time. Like, that's pretty cool for a body to be able to do those things. So, but you are not your body. Mind is limitless. Death is not the end. I hope that gives you some things to think about. I want to thank my husband, Mark. You guys should thank him too, because when I started, this presentation was so boring. And he really helped me tighten it up. And I want to thank the program committee and you for your kind attention. Thank you.